So I think some of our audience watching this video might be wondering, okay, I'm not sure if I want to be a bookkeeper or an accountant or a CPA. Do I have to choose that up front? And I would say the answer is
hello and welcome back everyone to another edition of Bookkeeping Legends. My name is Raymond.
And I'm Calvin.
And this show is all about bookkeeping, accounting, and how to start a virtual bookkeeping business. In today's video, we are going to talk about the difference between bookkeeping, accounting, and CPAs. Now, make sure you stay to the end because we're going to reveal a top secret about how you can compete against accountants and CPAs as a bookkeeper. And with that said, let's get started in this video. I'm super excited about the topic today. Calvin, first of all, I'd like to, tell us a little bit about what is a bookkeeper? What does a bookkeeper do? And kind of, what are the roles and functions that a bookkeeper plays?
That's a very great question. And we get asked that all the time. What's the difference between a bookkeeper versus an accountant? So a bookkeeper is usually hired by a company to record their daily transactions. So whenever they make, for example, revenue and they get cash, so the bookkeeper may be in charge of taking the cash, putting it into the bank, and then recording that revenue into the accounting software. And then they're often also recording the different checks and the expenses that the company makes. So whenever a company makes a payment, so they have to cut a check, the bookkeeper will go in, they would create the check, and then they would mail the check out, and then to make sure everything is paid on time. And then the bookkeeper also does all the normal daily things, for example, filing their taxes or filing their sales tax reports and making remittances to the government. So I would say the bookkeeper is the day-to-day hands-on person that takes care of the finances of any particular company.
Gotcha. So as a bookkeeper, you're doing a lot of the kind of preparing the records, you're making the journal entries, and are you also, does a bookkeeper, is one of their responsibilities to also prepare the financial statements, Calvin, or is that kind of specific? Like it could really depend on, certain people will want their bookkeepers to do that, but other people, maybe the bookkeeper's duties are a little bit less than that.
So that really depends on the skill of the bookkeeper. So if the bookkeeper has very limited understanding of financial statements, it's probably a good idea for them to leave that into the hands of the accountant or the CPA, because the accountant and CPA, their specialization is knowing how to create financial statements and also make sure everything is in the right place. So for bookkeepers, they have that option of whether they can prepare the financial statements. Obviously, if the bookkeeper has that skill, then it will probably save the company some money because the bookkeeper can prepare the financial statements themselves rather than having the accountant, which usually charges a lot more money just to do the same thing, to prepare the financial statements. So it really depends. In my experience as a accountant working in the accounting firms, most of the clients for the small businesses, their bookkeepers do not know how to create financial statements. They may know how to create some simple financial reports like a profit and loss statement, something that can show the owners how much money they made, how much expenses they paid, but they might not have a very good understanding of where to categorize things. So usually the accountant would go in and they would make sure everything is done correctly. And some companies just ask the accountant, okay, can you guys do the financial statements altogether?
Gotcha. And this is a really good segue into, the difference between a bookkeeper and an accountant. So as you said, bookkeepers are responsible for more of the kind of the day-to-day transactions. Preparing financial statements could be part of their responsibilities if they have advanced enough accounting knowledge, but perhaps some of the time or most of the time, that responsibility could fall into the hands of the accountant. So my next question to you, Calvin, is, what is an accountant? Like how does an accountant differ from a bookkeeper? And are accountants kind of like upgraded versions of bookkeepers?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. So the accountant is a bookkeeper and more. So they have to have all the skills of a bookkeeper. They have to know how to do their debits and their credits and how to classify things. But they're usually a little bit more educated so that they they're able to do more than just what the daily transactions can do. The accountants usually take care of the more advanced things like doing amortization for capital assets, for example. Like a lot of bookkeepers know how to maybe record, okay, I bought a computer, let's put, $1,000 of computers on the books. But then they don't know how to amortize it over the 3 years. So the accountant usually goes in and does that calculation, and then they would either send those adjustments to the bookkeeper to do, or they might do it on behalf of the company if the owner asks them to do that. So the accountant usually comes in, maybe not on a day-to-day basis, maybe at the end of a month or at the end of a quarter or at the end of the year. For most small businesses, the accountant just comes in at the end of the year, and they would do all the amortization. They would adjust the loans and the mortgages to the correct amounts. So they do the year end. That is the majority what accountants do. They come in at year end, and then they would make any adjustments they need to, and then they would produce the financial statements.
Gotcha. So that was a very, very clear explanation. So it seems like bookkeepers are more on the kind of like the day-to-day transaction, possibly preparing the monthly packages. Accountants could come in at the every month to review the financial packages, or they could be a year-end thing, because it's really specific and dependent on each individual business. So, but it's also very possible for businesses, especially small businesses, to have both bookkeepers and accountants. Is that something you would say is accurate?
That is also possible, and it's because bookkeepers and accountants, the rates might change, might differ quite a bit. Usually, the accountants charge a lot more because they bring a lot more of a skill set. But a lot of times, the bookkeeper would work very closely with the accountant. So if there's something that the bookkeeper is not sure about, they can always send an email, or they could give a call to their accountant and ask, oh, how do I record this particular transaction? Oh, I got this refund from CRA, or I got a refund from the IRS. Okay, what do I do with it now? And then so bookkeepers and accountants, when I was an accountant working in the firms, the bookkeepers would just email me once in a while and say, oh, how do I record this? And then I would help them to record this. So that's the external accountant. And for companies as well, they also have different levels. So for example, in the insurance company I was working for, they have accounting clerks, which are kind of like the bookkeepers. So they have a whole team of people doing accounts receivable and a whole team of people doing accounts payable. So these people would do the daily transactions, cut the checks, record the revenue that comes in, and then they would actually send the information to the accounting team, which would actually go and process it at month end and make sure everything is done correctly, do the correct monthly expense accruals for expenses that incurred for the current month. Let's say your electric bill, you have to pay $100 for electric bill for the month of November, for example, but you don't have to pay it until December, but the expense is for November. So the accounting team goes in and does all these accruals and make sure the November expense gets recorded in November in the correct month. So companies could have just a bookkeeper with an external accountant, usually from an accounting firm, but they could also have internal bookkeepers plus internal accountants.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for that very clear explanation. So it seems like, a lot of small business, they could just have, a bookkeeper to do their day-to-day books, prepare the monthly packages, and that external accountant that comes in at the end of the year. But again, very specific on each individual business's situation. So I'd like to transition now. What is a CPA? So, is a CPA, like a super upgraded bookkeeper? Is it an upgraded accountant? I know you yourself, Calvin, you're a CPA, so perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what a CPA is, what a CPA does.
Right. So from my experience at that company, so somebody can start off with just a bachelor's degree or a college degree in accounting or commerce. They don't have any professional designation like a CPA. So they start up as a bookkeeper, they do the bank reconciliations and do the accounts receivable, and then they work their way up to become like a junior or an intermediate accountant, but they still don't have a CPA designation. So which is fine. You can usually get to around the junior intermediate level without getting a CPA designation. But once you want to move up the corporate ladder into the senior accountant level, to the controller level, to the CFO level, almost every single one of those people will have a CPA designation, because the CPA designation is a certification that you have the technical knowledge as well as the relevant work experience, which is approved by your state or by your province or by your country, depending on which country you're in. So to move up to the higher levels of accounting, you need to have that CPA designation.
Gotcha. So the CPA is the most upgraded, the highest level you could reach, for an accounting designation if you're studying accounting. But as a bookkeeper, you don't necessarily need to have, those education requirements or even an accounting degree. Would you say, like, as a bookkeeper, it's actually very, like, almost anyone could study and train to be a bookkeeper if they, have interest in accounting and, develop those foundational accounting skills?
Oh, absolutely. I know so many companies, they've had their bookkeeper for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, don't have a designation, but they know the business inside out. They know the owners, they know the shareholders, they know how to deal with the government, they know how to deal with other stakeholders. And then so these people know the business inside out because they've been with the company for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so there is no need to get a CPA designation if you just want to be working on a daily transactional basis. And because learning bookkeeping and accounting is actually not too overly difficult. To learn the first level, you can take a course, you can take an online course, and then you could probably have a lot of the knowledge that you need. And then all you need next is some practical experience working with the software and getting familiar with it. And so I think for most people, you actually don't need to go all that route, because becoming a CPA takes time. It costs a lot of money. And a lot of people working full-time jobs, they probably don't have the time or the money to invest in that kind of education and that time.
Gotcha. That's awesome. That was very, 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 very helpful. So, I think I have a much better understanding of, bookkeeper versus accountant versus CPA. So one of the things I'm sure a lot of watchers will want to know is that as a bookkeeper, how do you compete against accountants and CPAs, right? Because in the hierarchy of things, it seems that bookkeepers are at the bottom of the hierarchy. That's just, a reflection of the education that they've received. But that's not to say that they don't play a very important role in the accounting organization. But how do bookkeepers compete against accountants and CPAs for business? And are they even competing for the same type of business?
I would say it's very different because of the CPAs and the accountants. They spend so much time and so much money into their education. So they generally charge a much higher charge-out rate. So an accounting partner could easily charge $250, $300, $400 an hour, right? Whereas most businesses cannot afford that on a day-to-day basis. And it's not really worth the accountants or the CPA's time to do it on a daily basis if they're going to charge you several $100s an hour, right? So basically the bookkeeper, where that they come in and where they're valuable is that they're able to offer a significant service at a much more reasonable price. And especially for a lot of small businesses, they don't have that huge budget to pay, the accountant to do daily transactions. They're not going to pay like $250 an hour to just record, the cut some checks and also record some revenue, right? So the bookkeeper, in terms of how many bookkeepers there are versus how many accountants, obviously you need a lot more bookkeepers than accountants, because the accountant, all you need to do is maybe do the financial statements once a year. But the bookkeeper is needed on a day-to-day basis. And what they do is very, very important, because they're capturing the daily transactions, which the accountants eventually need to use, at the month end or at the year end time. So bookkeepers definitely have their value, and they definitely have their place in terms of preparing the books.
Awesome. So it seems like if someone was, studying or wanting to become a bookkeeper, would you say that it's kind of like an unfounded fear that you're not necessarily competing against accountants and CPAs for business, because accountants and CPAs are charging out at a much higher rate as a reflection of their higher education level and the training that they've had to come through. But as a bookkeeper, you're coming in at basically a value-added pricing. So you're selling essential services to these small businesses, coming at a very affordable, value-based price. And that's why accountants and CPAs are not necessarily your competition. So it's more about understanding how to market yourself to these various small business owners. Would you agree with that, Calvin? Would you say that's one of the secrets that a lot of people are kind of misinformed about? Bookkeepers, you're not necessarily competing against accountants and CPAs.
Rather than being competitors, actually they're your friends, because a lot of accountants actually employ bookkeepers to help their clients do the bookkeeping. So that's actually what happens in a lot of small accounting firms, and I've worked for several. And so I know that the accountants actually do hire full-time bookkeepers to help their clients do bookkeeping. And so they're actually your friends. They need the bookkeepers to help their clients do the books. And then so that at the year end, they can take all that information and then they can prepare the financial statements. So it's kind of like a teamwork, The bookkeeper would do the daily transactions and then pass it on to the accountant at the month end or at the year end time.
That's amazing. So as a bookkeeper, if you actually develop relationships with these accountants and CPAs and say, hey, I'm a bookkeeper, I can be of service to you and also to your clients, you can actually go in and get referrals from these accountants and CPAs. So they're not necessarily your competition; they're your friends. So I love the way you phrased that, Calvin. That was super helpful.
So for my experience, actually, so I work for an accounting firm, a small accounting firm with a few accountants, and then they actually do contract out the bookkeeping work to bookkeepers. So you don't even have to be employed by the accounting firm. You can just work with them as a contractor. They get the clients, and then because they know you, they can say, oh, do you have time to do bookkeeping for this particular client? We can negotiate a good rate for you, and then we can work together. So the bookkeeper can have the clients of the accounting firm, because the accounting firm needs a bookkeeper to help them their clients do the books. And then so it actually works out pretty well together. So the bookkeeper gets clients through that way, and then the accountants also get the work done through the bookkeeper.
That's amazing. So thank you so much, Calvin. That was super helpful. And I hope everyone watching today, if you're new to the bookkeeping and accounting world, you understand now the difference between bookkeepers, accountants, and CPAs. Before we end this video, Calvin, is there any kind of final thoughts and words that you'd like to share with the audience? You are teaching the Bookkeeping Legends course as well, which you can share a little spiel about, and before we end off this video.
Absolutely. So I think some of our audience watching this video might be wondering, okay, I'm not sure if I want to be a bookkeeper or an accountant or a CPA. Do I have to choose that up front? And I would say the answer is, whatever you want right now, get the education you need. So say you want to take an online course, or you're not exactly sure what you want to do yet. You want to be a bookkeeper or accountant. So a lot of people, what they do is they start off as a bookkeeper. So they get some hands-on experience working with accounting software, and then they also get to work with clients, or they work under an employer. And then later on they decide, oh, I actually like this. Let me become an accountant. And then so they can work the way up the corporate ladder for their employer, and then eventually they can say, oh, employer, I actually want to become a CPA now. What are my potential career advancements? And actually, a lot of times the employers actually would support that, because if that bookkeeper decides to become a CPA eventually, then they can add more value to the company. So if you're starting off at the point zero right now, you don't have any experience, you're wondering which of the three routes you have to pick. Do you have to pick now? You don't have to pick right now. You can just start off with doing basic bookkeeping, and then eventually, if your career you want to have move up the corporate ladder, then you also have the option to become an accountant and maybe work on your CPA later as well.
That's amazing. Super, super helpful. You don't need to decide now. Start off with bookkeeping. It seems like that's the base, the basis. If you have no foundational accounting knowledge, you upgrade your skills. You can later on become an accountant. And if you want to further upgrade, you can become a CPA. So super awesome advice, Calvin. So just like to thank all our viewers once again for joining us on another episode of Bookkeeping Legends. And me and Calvin look forward to seeing you guys next time.
See you in the next video. Bye.